Grell, Persuasive Speech. What do you think of when you think of a mercenary? You think of some guy with the crazy mohawk, a really big beard, carrying a bunch of guns and just shooting everything he sees? How about when you think of a private security contractor? Think of a guy that's about 6 foot tall, clean cut, wears a suit, has a little gun packed away under his suit jacket just in case something goes wrong. Well, these are actually the same thing, but the name is what gets people. Private security contractors and mercenaries got their fame back when Rome was sacked by the French under Pope Clement VII. The Swiss Guard, which is a mercenary force from Switzerland who protects the Pope, had about 150 men at the Vatican at the time. That night that the Vatican was sacked, less than a third of them made it out alive. This shows the honor, the commitment, and the sense of duty that these men feel towards the person they protect. This goes the same for all mercenaries. So what are they? They're private companies that do things like armies do. They spend a lot of time in nations that are at war, providing peace and security to civilians and to military personnel. At times, they will be bodyguards for people such as generals, presidents, and prime ministers. At other times, they protect the diplomats for each nation. Jeremy Shaw wrote a book called Blackwater Down. It's about Hurricane Katrina. And it told the story that the first cops that showed up on scene were actually Blackwater mercenaries. They were given their power through the Department of Homeland Security days before a contract was even signed. They were in there in 24 hours and had the place ready to go. Nothing was a problem. You're probably wondering who they are too. This is a South African company called Executive Outcomes. Their makeup is 67.2% African, 8.9% Asian, and 17.9% Caucasian. Now you're probably wondering why this is important. Well, mercenaries have the capability to go into any place and adjust to the people that are there. Executive Outcomes did almost all their work in Africa, so a large amount of their force was African, helping them blend in with the civilian population. They also do a bunch of different things, from spending their time training, to flying, to shooting. One example is the 747 that just went down in Afghanistan a couple days ago. It was flown by a private security company. All 7 people on board were not military personnel, they were civilians, but they were hauling U.S. military equipment. This is also Executive Outcomes. This is where they work at. It's broken up different ways. So why are they better than a regular army? Well, their tactics are a lot better. The United States Army, according to Robert Gonzalez in his article Towards Merc Anthropology, talks about Field Manual 3-24. 3-24 tells U.S. military personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan to start to adjust to the culture of the people, just like the mercenaries did. This helps the U.S. military get along better with the civilians and find out what they need. Alan Axelrod wrote a book, The Real History of the American Revolution, and he talks about the crossing of the Delaware by George Washington. What few people know is that the army he was fighting was not actually British soldiers. They were German. They were all mercenaries, but they were trained to be a large fighting force. So instead of fighting them head-on, like most armies at the time would, Washington used mercenary tactics of small groups fighting and surprise. He shows that the tactics that the small groups used, which is mostly mercenary forces, actually is better than the tactics used by large armies. So, there's some more reasons we need them. In Justice on the Grass by Dina Temple Roston, she talks about the genocide in Rwanda and how UN peacekeepers sent from Belgium, who were supposed to keep the peace and prevent the genocide there, actually encouraged the genocide by killing people and beating them if they talked out against the troops and or the people committing the genocide. Kel Bork writes that in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Bosnia, the private security contractors are needed there to prevent the government officials, after the U.S. military leaves, from taking all the money that the U.S. gives them to help build schools, and to make sure that the schools are built without getting destroyed. Philip Gold writes in The Coming Draft that we're going to need mercenaries to fill the positions that the U.S. Army cannot. He talks about how in the early years of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, how recruiters would miss their quotas by 25% or more. To fill these gaps, we hired companies like Blackwater, whose mercenaries were paid a lot better, but did the same job. people really don't like being in the military, but they really like the idea of being a mercenary because of the image that goes with it. They're also better at protecting civilians. Military personnel are obviously distinctly stand out because they have to wear a uniform. It's not the same for the mercenaries. The mercenaries can hide their guns on them and walk around with the civilian population without anybody knowing. They're also more free to engage enemies. In Blackwater Down, he talks of how they were, while in Louisiana, they were ambushed by some, quote, black gangbangers. He said that they took care of them in no time at all. When the U.S. Army arrived, they asked what happened and went, oh, they shot at us. And the Army went, okay, have a good day, and left. So why armies don't really work? Well, the biggest problem, according to Dan Brooks, is that when it comes to the UN, there's a lot of scandals. High military officials are no different than politicians. They get in a lot of sex scandals, and it happens often. Only in these countries, it can tear the countries that are supposed to be keeping the peace apart. Other problems is because these countries don't see any strategic value in what they're doing, they just don't give the good supplies or the good men. They just give whatever they have. And then these men can't work together. It's been known that India and Pakistan have sent troops to the same location, and the troops ended up fighting each other instead of protecting the peace like they were supposed to. So mercenaries are a lot better. The UN has a 50% success rate in keeping the peace, where companies like Executive Outcome have a 100% success rate because they don't get paid until the job gets done. In Bosnia, mercenaries are also there to to do stuff that we normally wouldn't. Ronald Reagan sent them to Yugoslavia so that way he wouldn't have to commit U.S. troops and potentially start a war with the Soviet Union. Mercenaries are also a lot cheaper. Take, for instance, if you gave a $100 million contract to have mercenaries in a country, that same contract could last 10 years for every 1 year that the UN is in that place, because it costs the UN approximately $1 billion a year for every country that they're in. Some places, mercenaries are the only hope. In Darfur, the only thing that can help them, according to Michael Walzer in his article, Mercenary Impulse, is mercenaries, because no country is willing to send their troops there because there's no strategic value. They also have better training. A lot of mercenaries out of the United States and Israel are all special forces, meaning that they have some of the best training in the world. Now, there are some drawbacks. Some say that there's no legal ramifications, they'll hinder the military, and they kill civilians. But as can be shown here, a majority of U.S. troops that were surveyed said that these things were never true. And this is the unnecessary force one. Some say that they can cause more conflicts, but really they're just there to prevent the conflicts. In all, mercenaries are cheaper, faster, better, more disciplined, and better trained than most military forces can provide.